No, thanks. So let me give a very brief overview of my reactions to the budget focused specifically on the corporate sector. I should have added at the very start that, as you all know, Brookings itself does not have an institutional view on any particular issue. These are views of the individuals on the panel, they're personal. Okay? So I think the corporate sector is confused. And the reason they're confused is because this is a budget that has nothing specifically targeted at them. Having said that, if you read between the lines, the corporate sector would suggest that the finance minister has walked the tightrope between, on one hand, reaffirming his fiscal credentials and creating an eco sort of or an economic environment that would encourage growth, and on the other hand, recognizing that there is an election, around the corner, and there's always an election around the corner. So there's the state elections coming up, and then there will be the general elections. So they would, if I had to summarize their views in two sentences, it would be, it's a good good politics and sensible economics. It's a budget that has combined good politics with sensible economics. And secondly, it is a poor budget with aggressive fiscal ambitions. Now, if one has to now be more granular, which are the sectors, corporate sectors, that are going to benefit, and which are the ones that have taken a hit, and which are the ones that are maybe uncertain as to exactly where the dice will fall? Clearly, the corporate sectors, the companies that are involved with selling goods to the rural market and who have the distribution outreach to provide those goods are going to benefit from this increase in expenditure towards the rural sector. So as you know, I think it was the total investment, I can't remember, in the rural sector is about 280 crores, 80,000 crores, which is a substantial increase over last year. It's about 138% increase over last year's rural budget. Now, those companies that are involved with selling, say, soaps or toothpaste are going to benefit. So Hindustan Lever, you probably want to buy their shares. Colgate, you would like to buy their shares. Then the investment in rural infrastructure is going to benefit companies that are into supporting highway construction. So cement and steel companies will benefit to that extent. The fact that the distribution system is going to benefit, or that the leakages that occurred in the past because of an inefficient public distribution system is going to be reduced on account of the digital platform on which the government is going to now provide cash, or government is going to actually distribute the benefits, is going to again enhance rural spending. So the rural sector is, I mean, the companies that have a focus on rural India and infrastructure are certainly companies that will benefit. Which are the companies that probably are worried? And I'm not saying that they are necessarily going to see a downturn in their share price, but they're probably sitting around worrying about the cost benefits at the moment. So automobile companies, there's a cess on all luxury automobile companies. So clearly, 1% on petrol, 2% on diesel, 4% on SUVs. Now that's going to impact demand to an extent, but so you will say that a company, like Tata Motors or Mahindra might actually see some maybe concern. Energy companies should be really worried. There is no provision in the budget as such to support, at least not that I've read of, to support solar or wind companies. So the increase in the cess on coal production from 200 rupees a ton to 400 rupees a ton, which the Minister of Environment is billing as a carbon tax, is not going to necessarily support investments in solar energy or wind energy. Oil and gas exploration got mentioned in the speech, but when you actually look at the fine print and you set that fine print against the international oil and gas environment, you have to ask whether it's going to have any impact at all. So what did they say? Today, the oil and gas companies in the exploration business are paying a tax on the basis of a specific rupees per ton. It's a specific tax of 4,500 rupees per ton of oil produced. So ONGC or Reliance will pay an equivalent of $9 a barrel on every barrel that they produce. That has now been replaced in this budget by what they call an ad valorem tax, which is a tax based on value, and that percentage is 20%. So 20% ad valorem tax is now going to replace the specific tax that was levied on oil and gas exploration. Now, this is what these companies were asking for. But when you actually calculate the impact of a 20% ad valorem on $30 a barrel, you're saying you're reducing the existing tax burden from $9 a barrel, specific tax, to around $7 a barrel. So they do benefit to the extent of $2. But if the price of oil goes up from $30 to, say, $40 a barrel, then this $2 benefit is wiped out. Okay? And the $2 benefit is just not sufficient to incentivize, companies to invest in deep offshore exploration or in logistically difficult or geologically complex areas. So that's one concern that I have, which has not been talked about, that this seeming benefit of $2 a barrel could very quickly get wiped out, and even if it were not wiped out, it is not sufficiently aggressive to incentivize exploration, new exploration. The second concern that I have is that the government has made no mention of unconventional oil and gas. So this particular benefit that they have actually given, they gave a second benefit, which is important for all of us. So as you know, that gas price today in India is controlled. And the one thing that companies have been looking for is a market-based pricing mechanism. And this is a system that was offered to the oil and gas companies years back, and then the government changed its tack and imposed an administrative price or administrative cap on oil and gas companies. In this budget yesterday, the finance minister actually said that new discoveries as of new production as of the 1st of January 2016 will now be allowed to charge at market-linked prices. In principle, that's exactly what these companies have been asking for. Okay? But he went ahead and said this will apply to discoveries in deep waters, offshore deep waters. He made no mention of whether they will apply to unconventional oil and gas discoveries, tight oil and shale, which is really the revolution that we've all, been talking about for these past 5 or 6 years. I'm sure that if and when we do have any unconventional discoveries, this concession might well actually apply to them. But these are sort of uncertainties in this environment that make it a little difficult for oil and gas companies to decide whether this is a radical shift or a shift at all. Or, a radical shift, an incremental shift, or a shift at all. In my personal view, they have done very little to actually change the operating environment for oil and gas companies. So, now if you were to take a more generic view, what are the negatives, the macro negatives as far as investors are concerned? Clearly, the fact that the minister did not repeal the retroactive tax issue is going to stick in the gullet of a lot of companies, especially those who have, who are contemplating investment in India. Now, the minister has made it very clear time and time again that he does not accept retroactive. My personal view, had he repealed this retroactive tax issue in the first budget, he would have been okay. But having actually come out openly at that time, 2.5 years, in July, less than 2 years back, that all pending issues will be settled, he is now hoisting his own petard. He has to continue to repeat that particular statement. He has to continue to say that all pending issues will be settled through due process. And so a Vodafone, charge is defended on the grounds that it is a pending issue. It was an issue that actually was, pending prior to the retroactive tax announcement. It doesn't do much good for sentiment, for investor sentiment. You have to actually take a very clear view, and he hasn't taken the clear view, and I think that's a negative. I think it's
this one. Has he not opened a new settlement mechanism? Or is that?
Yeah, he's opened a settlement mechanism by saying you pay the principal. You pay the principal and you're out. You don't have to pay. You don't have to pay a penalty. You don't have to pay the interest.
Oh, so you just pay the full
just the full amount.
Oh,
now there are companies. For instance, I'm on the board of Vodafone, for example, but that's a separate issue. There are companies who might be saying that, look, I don't even agree with the basic principle of being levied. I mean, why should I pay when I'm actually disputing the fundamental? Now they're saying, and by the way, companies might, and I'm not saying that this is the way that I would recommend, but companies might well say, let's just close this chapter, let's pay the principal and get on with our business. After all, we have billions of dollars sunk in the country. If we continue to sort of quibble with the government on this issue, we run the risk of compromising our sunk investments. So let's pay and get on. That's the way of closing this chapter. But
so this wasn't available before?
No, this wasn't available before. Although behind the scenes, I'm sure this particular offer had been made. And behind the scenes, this probably was. To be fair to this government, and I think to the finance minister and to everyone, they are embarrassed, in my personal view, by this issue. They want to close this issue. They would like to get, but they've said too much, and they can't in public, and therefore they can't sort of be seen to be shifting ground. So, so that's the FDI issue, and sorry, that's the retroactive acts. On FDI, of course, as you all probably know, he made one announcement, which I think is quite an interesting announcement. He said, any company that invests in India, in the rural sector, that manufactures products in the rural sector, and then decides to sell it wherever it wishes to, will have 100% tax exempt. Will be allowed to own 100%. So any foreign company. So there is you've actually opened up the rural sector to foreign direct investment, provided, you have to invest here, you have to manufacture here, you don't necessarily have to sell here, okay? Yeah? I think the other concern that Indian companies have, especially Indian more so than the foreign companies, is that whilst this Make in India program is sort of acquired some traction, I think they would prefer if the whole thrust was Make India competitive. So there's not enough has been done to actually reduce the transaction costs of doing business in India. So the ease of doing business in India is not only about trying to overcome the entry hurdles, getting approval to invest. That is certainly the first step. But once you're in India and you're actually doing business here, you get worried about overzealous tax inspectors, you get worried about all sorts of hassles. Now, I can tell you that every single board that I'm on, every board meeting, there must be at least 10 pages on the tax issues and the litigation that these companies are facing with tax people. Now, you can rationalize taxes in the way that he talked about. You can simplify the tax structure, but the big worry that companies have is, can you actually control the tax inspector, the guy on the ground? And when he levies a tax, passes a tax charge against you, he is within his right to do so. And once that happens, the sort of engine leaves the station. You suddenly have to contend with that. You have to hire a lawyer. You have to go to the courts. You have to then start to challenge it. And it takes up a lot of management time. Plus it costs. Indian lawyers are now costing almost as much as international lawyers. So the hassle factor has not been actually addressed enough. So that's another concern that companies have here. So let me just stop there. If there's anything else, there's been some discussion about taxes. Actually, the manufacturing tax has not been reduced significantly. According to Chidambaram, it is effectively reduced by 1%. But he is looking to simplify it. I don't think the companies, the Indian companies, are at all worried about the taxation issues. They're more worried about the concerns that I've just outlined. So I'll be happy to answer. Yeah, there is this big issue, which is the pending issue to do with the public sector banks and the capitalization. Just not enough direction on exactly how are you going to recapitalize the public sector banks. The 25,000 crores that's been provided in the first phase is, as everyone knows, just insufficient. The kind of numbers that we are talking about when we talk about stressed assets and NPAs, we're talking about 200,000 crores. So the finance minister has repeatedly said, he said it yesterday in many investor forums, that this is the first step. He's appointed Vinod Rai committee to look at how he's going to actually address this issue. Let's see. But as far as the corporates are concerned, that was a big issue because there's a credit choke right now. Most companies that want to borrow money are not going to get the money, assuming that their balance sheet enables them to borrow. Of course, those companies that are highly leveraged and are not either not going to be able to borrow, but they don't even know exactly where they stand. So there is that uncertainty about the banking system. So let me stop here. Shamika.